This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. This is a show talking about topics of the day from a secular and humanist value perspective. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
In this full episode, we talk about celebrating the holidays as a secular person. I step into a debate over speech on college campuses concerning the current war between Israel and Hamas. And then we take a deep dive into the origins of the religious right.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community with reason and compassion for a better tomorrow. Views expressed on the Glass City Humanist are not necessarily those of Sholey or WAKT Radio.
As this is being recorded, it is the month of December, and every year, the month of December, there are many, many holidays. I took a look to see how many holidays are celebrated in December, and obviously there's quite a few religious holidays. We have Christmas, obviously. There's Advent, Hanukkah, Feast of the Holy Family, the death of Prophet Zarathustra, and then you have Kwanzaa. And those are just, like I said, those are just religious holidays. Now, some people, question, when we're talking about humanism, I guess they come out and they say, well, I guess you aren't allowed to celebrate these holidays, right? Because you're humanist, you're non-religious, you're secular. Most of us are secular. And that's not necessarily true. One of the main things about holidays that we latch on to, even though we don't go for the religious meaning, is, it's a time to gather with friends and family and honor and celebrate the end of the year, because we have, New Year's Eve coming up at the end of the month. And, and it's winter time and it's time to gather and cook some food and have a communal meal, pass out gifts. There's a lot of things that you can do that aren't necessarily specifically religious and still celebrate a holiday. And there's also some, oddly enough, some secular type holidays in December as well. One that's been around for a little while is called Human Light. The date for Human Light is December the 23rd, which is probably one of the reasons why I don't personally celebrate it. I try to avoid secular things that co-opt religious things, that obviously co-opt religious things, and having it on the 23rd just seems too much. But we also have the winter solstice, which is, the 20th, 21st, 22nd, of December. There's also a one that's based in TV history called Festivus. That was a holiday created by the character George Costanza on Seinfeld by his father as a counterpoint to the crash commercialism of Christmas, which still exists. There's still a lot of commercialism about Christmas. And so the character's dad had come up with Festivus, and you had a Festivus poll and giving of grievances and tests of strength, and it caught on. I mean, it's still popular for many people who followed the TV show, but that's one way. The other thing to consider too is a lot of the trappings of the Christmas holiday is not originally religious. Having a Christmas tree in your house, that's a pagan ritual. The pagans used to do that. They used to bring evergreens into their house in order to bless the winter and making sure that they have a good harvest the next spring. So they would bring evergreens, which never died during the wintertime, into the house and decorate it with candles and things like that. And in fact, most people kind of ignore or don't acknowledge that one of the strictest religious orders, the guys that they're the people that we celebrate for coming to the New World, the Puritans, who had come to the New World that eventually became the United States in order to practice their religion freely. They outlawed Christmas. Because back in those times, back in the 1700s, Christmas was a party. Drunkenness, public drunkenness, and it was an all-night party and debauchery and stuff like that. So when the Puritans got their own area in Massachusetts, one of the first things they did was they outlawed the celebration of Christmas. You know, a lot of the religious conservatives, when they're going on about the war on Christmas, they forget that their brethren in the early days had outlawed it. And there's still some religious groups that don't celebrate Christmas. I believe Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't celebrate Christmas. There's also some extreme religious conservatives that don't celebrate Christmas. They don't believe in giving gifts to people. They only believe in giving gifts to Jesus. This one article I read, what they would do is they would have a birthday cake for Jesus. And it would be all about Jesus, because obviously in the story, that's why it's called Christmas, is because it's the birth of Jesus. Even though the dates, the historical record is murky, and anyway, we're not going to get into that today. The other thing that we have, the other conflict that we have sometimes with religious conservatives is saying happy holidays to be inclusive. A lot of retail clerks and people going about their business during the holiday season, you'll see somebody, you'll say happy holidays, and well, religious conservatives just get all up in arms about it. And like I said, they call it the war on Christmas because you're trying to outlaw Christmas, and that's not the case. Basically, if you say happy holidays to somebody, you're trying to be as inclusive as you can. Because you don't know that person. See, that's the thing, is you come up to a person and I think it's wrong to assume that one, that they're Christian, and two, that they celebrate Christmas. They might not. They might not be Christian. They might not be, they might not celebrate Christmas. So saying happy holidays is you're being nice and considerate to somebody. And it's being inclusive. Maybe it's somebody who celebrates Kwanzaa. Maybe it's somebody that is Orthodox and they're following the Advent, or the Orthodox Russian Orthodox Church. They don't even celebrate Christmas. They celebrate Christmas in January. The birth of Christ is celebrated on, I believe, January the 7th. And so if you say Merry Christmas to them, they're not going to know what you're talking about. But if you say happy holidays, that's just a way of building relationships with people, and that's important. A lot of times when we have strife and violence about surrounding religion, it's because people don't want to know each other. They don't want to build relationships and know that we're all in the same boat and that we need to work together and do these things. And so it's important to say that to people, say happy holidays. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with, in particular, humanism and the holidays and ways for non-religious people to celebrate, and I kind of wanted to, this is something that comes up every year, is one of the things that my humanist group, the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, one of the things that we've done the past few years is we've sponsored a family through the Lucas County Children's Services. And what that means is that we tell them that we'll sponsor a family, and they assign us somebody with their wants and needs, and we fill it, and we get them gifts. Because a lot of the families that go through the Lucas County Children's Services, they're struggling, they need help, and it's something nice to do. And one of the things that I get from members that talk to me about this is they're like, these people need help, all year round. And they do. There's a lot of people that are struggling that need assistance all year round, and they have a point. It just seems disingenuous at times to focus so much on holiday time, November, December, to do charity work and to help people. To me, it seems a little bit condescending to the people that are struggling, that need assistance. Well, throughout the rest of the year, we're not going to do anything for you, but hey, here in December, we're going to clean out our closet, and here's some old clothes we don't wear. Or my group, one year we volunteered at one of the local food banks, and we were clearing out all this crappy food. It was like stuff that you wouldn't even buy, people normally wouldn't consume normally. And they had shelves just chock full of stuff that was close to expiration date, canned goods. You can't keep canned goods forever. And it looked like people were cleaning out their cupboards and getting rid of canned goods that they had had for years, and it was just bothersome. And so one of the things that we decided to do was when we set up our campaign for this year in particular, is let people know that we acknowledge that these people need assistance all year round, and we're going to try to do something all year round. We have tentatively planned that we're going to volunteer at a food bank probably in February, to coincide with Charles Darwin Day. And that's one of the things we want to do, is go in February, and then we'll try to do it again in the next quarter, like during the summer, and try to find opportunities where we can help people all year round, because people need help all year round. The other thing too is when we're helping food banks, one of the things that we want to do is we also want to donate cash, actual money, to the food banks, not just our old canned goods, our old food that we want to get rid of, or our old clothes, things like that. When you donate to other charities that like Goodwill and Salvation Army. I don't know why people would donate to Salvation Army, but anyway, that's a whole other story we're not going to get into. But that's one of the things that we want to do going forward, and that's kind of like a common sense thing that we've come up with, is that we are going to identify places and things where we can help people all through the year. We might try to sponsor a family locally, outside of an agency. Maybe we hear about somebody that needs help. Maybe they have, common thing, a house fire. Maybe they got burned out from a house fire and they need assistance. We might try to assist them with that way. We're still a small group, so there's not a lot we can do, but we're going to try. And one of the things that we talked about was about how religious groups like Catholic Charities and some of these other big charitable groups are able to do a lot because they have a large infrastructure, and that makes it hard for a small group like ours. But we're going to try to do what we can to help people and try to do that all year round. So when it's coming up to the holidays and you're looking, like I said, there's many different holidays that you can celebrate during December. It doesn't matter. You can even make up your own if you want. And the main thing is, just coming together with people that maybe you don't see all the time, sharing a communal meal, maybe exchanging gifts. It doesn't matter. And so you can still fit in during this holiday time with religious people who are celebrating it for different reasons. But, you don't have to be excluded. And it also would also do well for you to say to people, happy holidays, to try to be as inclusive as possible.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
Okay, before I talk about this topic that I want to talk about, I need to stress that I am speaking from myself. These are my thoughts, my opinion. It has nothing to do with the group that I'm part of, Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, other than the fact that some of the principles that I use to form my opinion is based on my humanism. Okay. And the reason why I need to clarify this is because of the topic I'm going to talk about. Back on December the 5th, there was a congressional hearing that included the presidents of some of the major elite universities on the East Coast. Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, MIT, and some others. And what it was a dog and pony show for Republicans in the Congress to talk about how the leftists on campus that are supporting Palestine are putting Jewish students in danger and whatnot. You know, that the campuses run amok and Jewish students are in danger or whatever they're trying to do. It's all part of, in relation to the current shooting war between the Israeli army and the terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. And that is a result of the terrorist group Hamas attacking Israel on October the 7th. And so the Israeli army has responded and they're in a shooting war, and thousands of innocent civilians in Gaza have been killed. But it seems that the government, particularly the Republicans, want to focus on how the Israelis are doing, which is fine because Israel got attacked. People were held hostage. Some women and children were murdered. I get that. That's something we really need to consider, and I send my thoughts that way, and that's a very, very bad situation. The response from the Israeli army, though, is 10 times worse than what they got, and we could have a debate about the Palestinian-Israeli question, and I think it's a good debate, because it needs to be resolved eventually, so we stop these tit-for-tat shooting wars. But anyway, what I want to talk about is this congressional hearing, and it was not chaired, but it included Representative Elise Stefanik, who has turned into a MAGA acolyte of Donald Trump. Anyway, so during this hours-long hearing on December the 5th, members of the Congress grilled these university presidents. And when it was Stefanik's turn, she repeatedly asked the presidents essentially the same question. Does calling for the genocide of Jews on your campus constitute harassment, yes or no? Now, most people and the regular media and a lot of people that I call low information type people that really don't pay attention to politics as much, jumped on the bandwagon and were upset that these college presidents didn't emphatically say, it's harassment. Yes. Because that would have been the easy answer for them to say that. Now, Stefanik didn't offer any proof that there was any groups going around on campus calling for the genocide of Jews. And the reason why this is such a burning question or inflammatory question is because of the Holocaust, the history of the murder of 6 million Jews during World War II by the Nazis and other people, other fascist dictatorships in that time period that also led to Jews being murdered. And so basically, in just me observing the questioning, it came across more as kind of like that conservative Matt Walsh in his question, what is a woman? You know, it's like, is calling for genocide of the Jews on campus constitute harassment? Well, these college presidents can't say yes or no, because the answer that she would not allow is it depends. And it does depend. Now, I will say for clarification purposes that somebody walking around campus calling for the genocide of Jews isn't genocide. The person may be anti-Semitic. They may dislike Jewish people. They are probably somebody we should pay attention to, because maybe they might cause some issues like violence or things like that. But if somebody's walking around campus saying, genocide of the Jews, we got to have genocide of the Jews, it's neither here nor there. All right. And these are the same conservative politicians who were so upset that their media darlings were denied platforms at some of these same universities to espouse their conservative, discriminatory, hurtful speech. And so basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to get them as a gotcha question to show how these elite universities are full of leftists and that they're hypocrites. And unfortunately, the presidents played into it because they're president of the university. They represent the university. They have to be careful what they say in public. And so they talked to their legal department and they gave a legal answer. The Guardian had a great article on this just on Monday talking about it. And the author of the article, Mustafa Boyomi, he pegged it. He said it was a trap. The question was a trap. And he said that, he said, for one thing, there's no evidence that anyone since October the 7th has called for the genocide of Jews on any American campus, public or private. And again, Harvard and MIT and University of Pennsylvania are private institutions. They're not public colleges. And he said the second reason it's a trap is because it can't be answered just yes or no, which is true. And it says the utterance alone does not constitute harassment. And that's my feeling. It's just because somebody is claiming to support genocide of the Jews doesn't necessarily, one, make them anti-Semitic, even though most likely they probably are, and it doesn't constitute an actionable offense. It just doesn't. It says, to rise to harassment, such conduct must be targeted at an individual, and as a 2019 Supreme Court case decided, be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively bars the victim's access to an educational opportunity or benefit. And just like the president said, context makes the difference. And it says it's the context that matters. The context helps to make the determination about whether conduct is actionable under school policy or protected by the First Amendment. And then this writer at The Guardian said the third reason it's a trap is because of the overarching codes of conduct that many universities adopted. He talks about how in the Wall Street Journal, Stefanik ridiculed Harvard for requiring incoming undergraduates to take an online training session to help them identify language and behavior that could be considered hateful to others, but at the same time demanded to be included in that training. So basically it was a gotcha moment. It went viral. People are jumping on the bandwagon. It reminds me of, what is a woman? That question from Matt Walsh or that meme where he's sitting, some guy sitting at a table. It says, Cleveland Browns stink, change my mind. Something like that. It's just something that they're using, and Stefanik's gonna raise money off this. And that's the thing. Now, what the writer in The Guardian points out is that it's also like the dead cat strategy, where you're having a discussion and somebody throws a dead cat on the dining room table. people are disgusted and appalled by the dead cat, and then they end up talking about the dead cat instead of what they should be talking about. And the writer points out that billboard trucks have driven around Cambridge, Massachusetts, where MIT and Harvard are, New York City and Washington, broadcasting the names and faces of Palestinian supporters and labeling them anti-Semites. University leaders have suspended campus groups such as Students for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. 3 Palestinian college students were shot in Vermont over Thanksgiving break. And then on November the 29th, dozens of students and some faculty members at Trinity College, where one of the students is enrolled, walked out of a vigil for the injured student because they say the campus administration is downplaying their insecurity on campus. But we have to worry about genocide of the Jews. Anybody who says genocide of the Jews. And if we don't take the side of the Israelis in their current battle, we're anti-Semites. Or we want, because we don't support Netanyahu, we're supporting genocide of the Jews, which is not the case. And so basically that's the thing is, it's not, people aren't talking about the Israeli assault on Gaza that's killed at least 17,000 people. Over 7,000 of them are children, injured over 49,000. Now these are people that did not attack Israel, okay? The Hamas terrorist organization, they're definitely getting comeuppance for what they did, but it's spilling over into the deaths of people who had nothing to do with it. More than 60% of the housing has been destroyed. Half the population is officially starving. Hospitals, historic mosques, essential libraries, and the entire foundation of a society have been bombed into rubble. You know, what kind of response is that? Really? And I get it. Hamas attacked Israel. I get it. Israel should be able to respond to that attack. I get it. But then you have all the media is talking about are these university presidents that didn't answer a question yes or no. And I think it's ridiculous.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
We had this recent State Issue 1 that was passed in November 7th, that codified, I don't know how to pronounce it, codified reproductive rights into the Ohio Constitution. It passed by 57% of the vote. And a lot of the religious conservatives lost their minds that this passed. And they just couldn't understand it, you know, because they're living in their gerrymandered bubble, political bubble, and they think that what they believe is what everybody believes, but obviously not everybody believed what they did. So 57% of the people said, no, we're going to put this in the Constitution. So, of course, you know, kind of like the movie Kill Bill, if anybody has seen the Quentin Tarantino classic, when the bride takes the other eye out of one of the characters and they thrash around before they pass away. That's kind of how the anti-abortion people in the State House were acting after State Issue 1 passed. And there's a pro-life caucus that issued a letter on November the 8th, and the next day, that was a little bit troubling when I read it. And there was this particular part in it that it says, and I quote from the letter, it says, "We will do everything in our power to prevent our laws from being removed based upon perception of intent. We were elected to protect the most vulnerable in our state, and we will continue that work." So essentially these people, this pro-life caucus people, were threatening to undermine the will of the voter. And there was some trial balloon put up where they were going to introduce a bill that would remove court jurisdiction to look at cases involving abortion and only have it decided in the General Assembly. Now, obviously that would more than likely be unconstitutional anyway, but it was just one of the ways that they would drag their feet because they didn't agree with the outcome. The other troubling part about this is that 6 of the people that signed on to this letter represent a good portion of Northwest Ohio. And that was very disappointing. The 6 people that signed it were Representative Derek Marin of District 42 in Monclova Township, Representative Josh Williams from District 41. He represents places like Point Place, and he's got a real gerrymandered district, and he represents like the northern reach of Toledo in Lucas County. And then you had Susan Manchester from District 78, Roy Kloppenstein of District 82, Roy Riordan McLean from District 87 down in Wyandotte County. And then you had Reverend Gary Click from District 88. He is from Fremont. They all signed on to that letter. Representative Marin is the son of a well-known anti-LGBTQ pastor from Monclova Township who passed away only recently. And it seems that his ideas and his stuff that he's opposed to has not fallen far from that tree. Representative Josh Williams introduced an anti-drag bill that basically essentially said that drag performances were obscene. In other places where anti-drag bills were passed, they were ruled unconstitutional, a violation of the First Amendment. And Representative Williams is seen as Marin's right-hand man. They are all almost always seen together in public events. When we had a tornado that hit Point Place over the summer, they had legislators showed up to, for the camera time to show that they cared. And there was Representative Williams, because it's his district, and then right behind him was Representative Marin. Derek Marin also had attempted to become the Speaker of the Ohio House, and for some reason, I know the reason, but my ethics say that I just can't repeat gossip, but he had made some religious political conservatives upset, and so he ended up losing the House speakership. If you go on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, you can find out, this guy called the Rooster. He does a lot of politics stuff. Representative Gary Click is very interesting. He's the pastor of a Baptist church in Fremont. He introduced the bill to ban gender-affirming care that's under consideration right now in the Ohio House. He also supports conversion therapy, which is not scientifically justified, and he claims to have facilitated conversion therapy sessions at his church. So, these are evangelical. Most of them are evangelical. We know Representative Click is, and Josh Williams. We know Derek Marin is. But these are people, the members of this pro-life caucus that want to undermine State Issue 1 after it's been passed. Luckily, cooler heads in the Republican Party and the State House prevailed, and the proposed law to take the courts out of it never went anywhere. And the stuff that we're hearing in the news and stuff is they're not going to consider undermining it. That's the thing. It's like if the voters choose to do something that you disagree with, there's not much more you can do, and you just have to move on. So as a private citizen, not as president of my group, I sent these members an email. I sent them all the same email and tell them, I saw this letter, the State Issue 1 passed by 57%. I let them know that they were an elected official who took an oath to defend the state constitution. And I said that if the outcome of State Issue 1 is too much for you and that you want to subvert the will of the voters, then you should resign your office. That's the option that they have. They can't not go by the law. Well, some of them do, but some of them refuse to abide by laws that are passed or voted on. But, that's one of the things that they can do. So I sent that to the 6 people from Northwest Ohio. I only got one response, and I got it from Representative Josh Williams' office. Their legislative aide sent me a note that they said, Representative Williams is a proud pro-life advocate, but he does respect the results of the Issue 1 election and will not act to repeal it or remove it from the court's jurisdiction. The letter does not anywhere state that those who sign the letter intend to overturn Issue 1. Certainly, Representative Williams does not at all have that intention. Thank you for reaching out. Well, the letter does say that they intend to overturn Issue 1. Because they said that they're not going to let it get rid of any laws that are already on the books. Well, that's subverting the intent of State Issue 1. So that's why I wanted to, talk about this rise of religious right and how that they do that. And it's very important to keep an eye out on what's going on locally and making sure it's not a limit. I'm not talking about doing a religious test for office because that's not allowed, but just knowing what your views of the people that are supposedly elected officials that represent your area, to know what their religious views are, because sometimes they're important. In this case, it's very important, because if somebody wants to subvert the will of the voters because their religion tells them to, that's something to know. That's something that you need to know about for the next time that elections come up.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
One of our recent monthly programs, in fact, the one we just had in December for the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, we talked about the real origins of the religious right. And we showed a video of a talk given by historian Randall Balmer. He's a professor of church history and religion studies at Dartmouth, and he wrote a book. It was called Bad Faith: Race and the Rise of the Religious Right. And so the talk that we showed in our interview, and I'll play a clip in a little bit, was given last year in 2022 after the Dobbs decision. And he talks about one of the myths about the rise of the religious right in claiming that it was all about abortion, stopping abortions. And he said that was not true. And he's done historical research. He's talked to the people, the powers that be in the religious right movement, the evangelical, and we're talking about evangelical Christianity, which makes up a large part of the religious right. We're talking about people like Jerry Falwell, who was the founder of Liberty University and his church in Virginia, and Paul Reinrich, and there's quite a lot of Ralph Reed, and basically what it is we're talking about evangelical Christians who use their religion to justify their conservative agenda, political agenda. So they're using their religion to justify their politics. And as Professor Balmer points out, that's a bad mix. And that's one of the reasons why we have the First Amendment, because one of the things it's trying to prevent is people using their religion to hurt other people. Either taking away their rights or making the Bible part of law. Making law out of the Bible, things like that. And so, Professor Balmer did a lot of research in writing his book, and he discovered that it's a myth that the rise of the religious right in the 70s and 80s was the result of a battle against abortion. And in fact, he points out that Jerry Falwell didn't have a sermon against abortion until 1979. And some other religious right group, evangelical groups like the Southern Baptist Convention and some others actually came out with statements in the late 60s, early 70s, particularly around the time that Roe v. Wade was decided, that called for the legalization of abortion. And he also points out that a lot of Protestant evangelicals didn't latch on to abortion because they considered it a Catholic thing, because Catholics have always been opposed to abortion. And so he had a lot of interesting things to talk about in this talk. And like I said, I'm going to play a clip here in a little bit, and I'm going to share the link in the show notes so you can go watch it, because it's very interesting, a lot of the things that he talks about. Now, I'm going to date myself. I grew up in the 70s and early 80s when I was in school, and I had always understood that the rise in the religious right came about because of conflict with teaching sex education in public schools. That was a big thing when I was in junior high school in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, was teaching sex education. And it got a lot of feedback from conservative parents who didn't want their little Timmy and Joni to be taught sex education. And in fact, the point that I made out at the meeting was, I had two friends of mine, two good friends. They were brothers, Tracy and Terry, and they came from a very strict conservative religious household. So much so that they weren't allowed to watch much TV. They weren't allowed to watch much TV. They weren't allowed to go to R-rated movies, that sort of thing. They weren't allowed to go dancing. Oh boy, that sounds like the plot line to Footloose. Anyway, and so one of the conflicts that they had with doing it in my school district is parents demanded to be able to opt out their kids if they didn't want them to learn. And Tracy and Terry were the only two people in my class that opted out of sex education. And they had to, when we were going to start that chapter in our health class, they actually had to get up, take their books, and leave the room. And then they went to another room and did homework. And so, you have a kid, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid, basically you're being ostracized because, that's the one thing. You don't want to draw attention to yourself when you're that young. And they had their, stuff, they had their attention drawn to them, which they did not wish for it to be. Anyway, so that's what I always thought. I always thought it was sex education, and other people think it was abortion. And Professor Balmer points out that it was none of that. It wasn't abortion at all. And in fact, I'm going to spoil it. So if you don't want to hear it, turn down the volume now. The real origins of the religious right is racial discrimination. Believe it or not. Well, for those of us who've studied this area for a long time, it's not a surprise, but it might be a surprise to people that don't get into the politics of church and state. But basically what happened was that there was a court decision in 1971 that disallowed tax exemptions for religiously based or religiously church-sponsored schools that were segregated, that discriminated against children of color, that didn't admit them. And many of these schools were founded by churches, and normally things that are founded by churches and operated by churches get a tax exemption from the federal government. And so somebody sued, or this town group of parents sued because they didn't want this school to get tax exemption. And so the court ruled that if the school was founded and one of their policies was to discriminate, they could not have a tax exemption, which is generally true in general, that racial discrimination, you can't get a tax exemption for racial discrimination. That's one of the protected classes in the Civil Rights Act. And so a lot of these conservatives who were segregationists didn't want the government to tell them that they had to admit black students, and so they started getting politically active. And most of the people that were politically active at this point were the power brokers, the people in charge, like the Jerry Falwells and the Ralph Reeds of the time, Paul Reinrich and Francis Schaeffer and some other bigwigs. They were politically active for that. They wanted to be able to discriminate based on race. They wanted to keep out, because that when you had the Brown v. Board of Education that forced the integration of public schools, a lot of these white families took their kids out of school, public school, and founded these private academies, religious academies, and kept out the black students. So this was the whole thing. So that was what set up the rise of the religious right, was they wanted to be able to discriminate. And one of the big named schools that lost tax exemption was Bob Jones University. I believe it's in South Carolina. They lost their tax exemption, and they've never asked for it back. And they use that in their advertising, that they don't take any money from the federal government. And the thing is, most people are like, well, it's a tax exemption. What's up? Well, it's basically a subsidy. It's a government subsidy, because these religious groups and churches are not paying taxes. They're not paying income tax. They're not paying property tax. And so other people then that live near them or are in the same city as them have to pay a little bit more for them to still get the same services. So they still get covered by the police and fire and sewage and all that stuff. So other people are paying for that. So that's why it's a subsidy. And that's why it's important that these religious groups and churches follow the rules. If you want to have a tax exemption, if you don't want to pay this tax, then you need to not discriminate.
With the retrospective of 81% of white evangelicals supporting Donald Trump for president in 2016, and again, a similar percentage in 2020, I think even actually a higher percentage in 2020, and trying to reconcile that with the origins of the religious right. Here you have a movement that had its origins in racism. And then you have this improbable, on the face of it, let's be honest about this. On the face of it, Donald Trump is not the traditional family values candidate. And this is a movement that for decades has been touting itself as a family values movement. And so I was trying to reconcile that and try to understand how we got from point A to point B. And it occurred to me in the course of writing this book that the real transitional figure here is Reagan himself. And as I looked a little bit more closely into Ronald Reagan's history and his career, it became clear to me that there's more than a coincidental juxtaposition of issues and concerns here. Reagan got into politics in California in opposition to the Rumford Fair Housing Act, which sought to guarantee equal access to both rental housing as well as the purchase of housing. He was an outspoken opponent of both the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. As president, he decimated the Civil Rights Commission. He maintained his support for the apartheid regime in South Africa long into the 1980s. And throughout his political campaigns, he frequently invoked the racially charged phrase law and order. And anyone who lived through that era can never forget his vile caricature of so-called welfare queens, women of color who were supposedly living the high life off of the public dole. He was never able to produce any of these welfare queens, but he talked as though they actually existed. And for me, I guess the most damning thing was his opening of his general election campaign in 1980, August 3rd, 1980, at the Neshoba County Fair in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the place where 16 summers earlier, 3 civil rights workers, 2 Jews and an African American, were abducted, tortured, and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in collusion with the local sheriff's department. And Reagan, of course, was the master of symbolism. And lest anyone miss his meaning, he declared the age-old segregationist battle cry, "I believe in states' rights." Now, Reagan could have opened his general election campaign in any number of places. California, his adopted home state, would certainly have been a good place because California was very much in play in the 1980 presidential election. He could have gone to one of the Rust Belt cities that had been decimated by the economic distress of the 1970s. Instead, he chose, of all places, Philadelphia, Mississippi, at the Neshoba County Fair. That, to me, is a pretty good indication of Reagan's sentiments on these particular matters. And so as I began to think about that, what is the connection between the origins of the religious right and the overwhelming white support for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020, I have to believe that one of the links in that loop has to be Ronald Reagan in his throughout his political career, particularly in the 1980s. Now, all of this narrative, does this say that, does this mean that all evangelicals are racists? I don't believe that's the case at all. Again, I grew up within this movement. I think there are a lot of blind spots that many evangelicals have about racial matters, but I don't believe that evangelicals overwhelmingly are racist. Nevertheless, I think they need to come to terms with the origins of their political movement.
I just want to make it clear again that, I'm talking about the power brokers, the people that are in charge, the leaders of the evangelical movement, such as Paul Reinrich and Ralph Reed and Francis Schaeffer. Some of these people are not with us anymore. Jerry Falwell was one. I'm talking about those people that use religion to advance their conservative political agenda, either to take people's rights away, such as banning abortion, or sponsoring a bill to prohibit trans people from using the bathroom of the gender that they identify with, or things like that. So, that's who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the average everyday evangelical who goes to church and donates to charity and does those other things. And I'm not saying that as Professor Balmer points out, he's not saying that they're all racist. But I agree with him in the point that he made that the foundation of a lot of these groups is rotten to the core. And if the foundation is rotten, eventually it's going to collapse on itself. And so if you have, John and Jane Q. Public, who's going to an evangelical Methodist church, and they discriminate against LGBT people, because some of them do. They just had this big schism. These churches left the Methodist group, and they donate money to the church who discriminate against LGBT people. You're in effect supporting that discrimination. So even if you yourself don't hate LGBT people, the fact that you're giving money to this organization that does is you're indirectly supporting that discrimination. And so all I ask is, if you are a religious conservative and you aren't racist, and you don't, you try to love all your neighbors as the Bible says, that maybe you need not to support those organizations that do. For example, and businesses too, like Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A supports anti-abortion groups in their charitable giving. But, there's always this huge lineup for their chicken sandwiches. So you're indirectly giving money to religious groups that will hurt the people that you don't hate. And so it's just, it's one of the things that we deal with every day, is how you balance that, how you balance your values. You don't want to discriminate, if that's not part of who you are, it makes it tough, especially for when you're talking about religious, especially religious people in their churches. Maybe they're going to the same church that their parents went, and their parents went to, and their parents went to, and their parents went to, and there's a long history in this family, and yet it's a religious conservative church that doesn't support helping poor people, or they give money to political campaigns which they're not supposed to do, or like we had this church over by where I live that had a candidate forum for Josh Mandel during when he was running for U.S. Senate, and he was the only one there because they were supporting this guy, and I reported it. I reported it to the IRS because people that get the tax exemption, the 501(c), like my group, we are not allowed to support individual candidates. We're not allowed to support or tell people not to support individual candidates, because that's a violation of our rules. So kind of bringing this back to the tax exemption, the Bob Jones case, today in 2023, the IRS does not enforce that rule about the tax exemption in religious groups. There's a backlog, in fact, of cases that they haven't even investigated, because these conservatives who get in office, that people, from the gerrymandered maps and other privileges that these religious conservative, well, I wouldn't consider them all religious conservatives, but these conservatives, they get into political office and then they change the rules. And that's what they've done, is they've kind of intimidated the IRS from investigating conservative religious groups that are obviously violating the tax laws. And so that's the trouble, And so that's why I'm appealing to people who might be listening to this to, think about where you donate your money, where you spend your money, so that you're not indirectly supporting discrimination, or not indirectly supporting a conservative agenda that hurts people that you love. And that's all I'm asking you to do.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show. See you next time.